an extension or expansion of liquor license use for outdoor patio use and other areas. So we're expecting the ABC to be issuing those shortly. It's we call a social distancing permit. And thank you everybody for tweeting out about the outdoor dining. We did get a call this morning from the governor's office asking to sit down with them to start establishing protocols. So certainly won't happen this week, but we are pretty confident that in the next week or two, that will be the first step to getting the restaurant industry back up and running. So just wanted to thank you. And I see we have Senator Menendez on the line, so we should unmute him. So Senator, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our webinar today. We certainly have appreciated your leadership in working on PPP and other programs to help our industry. You know, obviously, how devastated the restaurant, hotel, tourism industry has, how we've been affected, not just here in New Jersey, but across the country. So thank you for being on the call today are several of my board members, and I have a couple actually of my peers, other state restaurant associations who are certainly interested in what's going on in the federal government and also appreciate your leadership in this. So with that, I also believe we have Matt Walker will be jumping on from the National Restaurant Association. He handles the Senate relationships with you guys, so you probably know Matt. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie Cretella, who I know you know. And Jeannie is obviously a past chairwoman of the New Jersey Restaurant Hospitality Association and is now a current board member of the National Restaurant Association. So, Jeannie, I'm going to turn it over to you. You got to turn yourself off mute. But you're on mute, Jeannie.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for meeting with us today on this kind of unusual, but one that we've gotten used to, new Zoom meetings. We can't tell you how much we appreciate all the work that you've done on the PPP. Obviously, it worked beautifully for a lot of different industries. Unfortunately, for hospitality, it just was not an ideal situation. We recognize, though, all the hard work, and thank you so much for your bipartisan efforts in working with the National Restaurant Association to make necessary changes that will certainly help us. There are a lot of faces on this call. I don't know if you can see them all, but they are business owners from all facets of this industry. Most are all independent operators, family-run businesses. We have everyone here from quick serve restaurants to white tablecloth to venues, hotels, as well as hospitality amusement operators. Although all of our business models are really different, we really do share one collective goal, and that's to help strengthen the communities in which we do business, to offer opportunities to first-time employees. We open our doors to those who are re-entering the workforce, and of course, setting up a system that allows a career path and offers endless possibilities for people. Typically, it's always been the hospitality industry that helps in times of crisis, whether it's our community, the state, even on a national level. It's safe to say that we all probably have really thick skins. We've been through a lot, especially in our business where it's tough to stay afloat. We've been through 9/11, the recession of 2008, Hurricane Sandy, the list goes on and on. I know I speak for many when I say that this pandemic has created an atmosphere of just despair and has been unlike anything that we've ever imagined we could be in. Having to lay off team members is heart-wrenching. And for me, it was one of the hardest professional days I ever have had. Right now, many of us are wrestling with what we should do. Many of us have received PPP money. We're fighting with, do we use it? Do we turn it back? How is it best to use these funds? And if we're going to be able to afford to repay it in the short period of time that we currently have, especially if a good portion of it is unforgiven. We're really hoping that all the efforts that you're currently working on are embraced and that changes will be made. As you can imagine, I don't think any of us ever imagined that at the end of May, we would be in the situation we are. Today's May 20th, and it is the first time in my political career that I am not paying a sales tax because I have zero to pay. Sad to think that that's the case. So even though most of us have, prepared for that rainy day, I don't think we could ever be prepared for a rainy day to last months and months. And yet we still have the cost of maintaining closed businesses. And although many have applied for forbearance with landlords or our banks, the July date is quickly approaching. And yet we can't expect, even if we are open on a part-time basis, or for those who are doing takeout and delivery, our sales will never bounce back to what they had been in the next couple of months. It may even take longer, especially for those that are in the venue business, where we are noticing we'll have a tremendous decrease, not only in 2020, sales are lost, events that have canceled or gone, and 2021 is just not booking. But yet we still have things like insurance, utilities, real estate taxes, property maintenance. They all need to be paid, and the numbers are staggering. Probably what's most disappointing, Senator, is the fact that business interruption insurance is not being paid. And it's what we paid into. And, we would expect that when we had a tragedy like this, that business interruption insurance would have helped us. Obviously, if it did, we wouldn't be in this position or feel as desperate as we do. Without it, unfortunately, the face of New Jersey communities will change dramatically as restaurants need to close or file bankruptcy. So again, we so appreciate all of the hard work that you're doing, and we are so interested to hear what you hope will come as far as changes with the PPP, because we know that you're fighting to keep us alive, and we love you and respect you for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. And I hear the anguish in your voice. I see it in your face, so I understand. And I'm happy to see you this way, even if it's only virtually, but I'll be happier when we get some solutions and you're smiling again, as well as everybody else. So let me thank you and the New Jersey Restaurant and Hospitality Association for bringing us together, even virtually, and for the invaluable contributions you always make to our state. Our economy, I think, goes as you all go. I think that's pretty clear. The number of people you employ is just extraordinary. And certainly the association has always been a tireless advocate for its members. And, it's an extraordinary effort, and I appreciate Mary Lou's work all the time when you can't join all the time, her advocacy as well. But we know that our restaurants, our bars, our hotels, our catering halls, the entire industry is hurting right now. The COVID-19 pandemic has left no one unscathed. The social distancing and stay-at-home orders necessary to contain the spread of the virus helped flatten the curve. I believe it helped save lives. It prevented our healthcare system from being overrun, but with less people traveling or even venturing out to their own communities, the economic fallout has caused enormous pain all around. Many businesses have closed, unlikely to open again. Workers have been laid off or furloughed. Even establishments that could shift to delivery and takeout only are still in the red. I've heard directly from friends like yourself in the industry, and I understand that the struggle is real. Now, New Jersey didn't ask for 150,000 of our loved ones and neighbors to be infected with COVID-19. We didn't ask to mourn the death of over 10,000 of our fellow citizens. We are in the midst of a national public health and economic crisis, the scale of which certainly I don't believe any one of us have experienced in our lifetimes. You talked, Jeannie, about 3 different dramatic events, certainly in my congressional career. September 11th, the 2008 financial collapse, Superstorm Sandy. I have been here during all of those challenges, but this is unlike any of those challenges, which is why I fought hard in Congress to deliver over $600 billion in assistance to small business, mainly in the form of grants and low interest forgivable loans. Because I understand that loans for a business that is not taking any revenue in, even for a short time, only digs them further in the hole. We wanted to inject some immediate capital into the system to keep businesses afloat and workers paid while they weathered the storm. The goal was to ensure that any pain that felt be short-term, and that once we take care of the health of the nation, we would quickly bounce back and address the wealth of the nation. The PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, was designed to help New Jersey's businesses, small businesses, restaurants, bars, hotels, and others to make payroll, pay rent, protect jobs, and ultimately drive our economy. But as you know, the program was both rife with problems in its execution and also with the realities of where we are today in the economy, still facing the challenges of the virus. Funds dried up quickly, and too many small businesses, a lot of mom and pops that drive our local economies were left out, while big businesses were able to game the system. And one thing I've learned over the years that I've been here is that any federal program is only as good as its implementation. So when many of our colleagues just asked us to throw more money into the PPP program and call it a day, I know that I and my Democratic colleagues demanded new provisions to help money flow more smoothly to small businesses most in need. As part of that fix, we secured an additional $110 billion to go to small lenders and community-based financial institutions that often work with underbanked and underserved small business and nonprofits. You know, these are the entities that we find most likely to deal with many of you who are on the smaller side of the restaurant universe. And of that, $30 billion was set aside for community development financial institutions, minority deposit institutions, community-focused lending intermediaries, and the smallest of community banks and credit unions to offer their small business customers PPP loans. But even with creating a new lender base so that more people could get access, because I often heard from people, if I don't have a big bank relationship, I can't get access to even try to apply for the loan. A lot more has to be done to improve the PPP program. I'm working with my Republican colleague from Texas, John Cornyn, to allow businesses to use more of their PPP funding to cover expenses beyond payroll. That's particularly helpful in a high-cost state like New Jersey. Many restaurants and hotels may operate only with a few employees, but they need more help paying rent to stay open, for example. Because I understand that business isn't coming back with the flip of a switch, and it's going to take more time to recover, I want to give some small businesses more flexibility on the time frame to spend the PPP loans and still qualify for forgiveness. Starting the clock when the loan is dispersed, where state of emergency orders are still in full force and effect, doesn't make much sense for so many of you. I also believe that repayment terms need to be extended beyond the current 2-year term, allowing businesses more time to generate revenue to pay that part of the loan that isn't forgiven. And I also believe that the PPP program should be extended to 501c6s. Now, the House passed a legislation that is rather broad. It's called the HEROES Act, and it extended PPP eligibility to all organizations listed under the 501c code, including 501c6s. It also made many necessary changes to the PPP program, including prohibiting the Department of Treasury from placing any limitations on non-payroll forgiveness. It also extended the PPP covered loan period from June 30th to December 31st, allowing small businesses more flexibility on when to use the PPP and rehire employees. And the House of Representatives recently passed this critical piece of legislation that I hope that the Senate takes up many of these necessary PPP reforms. In fact, at the urging of several of us, I believe that the ranking member, that means the senior Democrat on the Small Business Committee, will go to the floor tomorrow in the Senate and ask for unanimous consent, which is a procedure here when you can't get something up for a vote. You ask for unanimous consent. It means that there has to be consent by all. If one senator objects, it won't move forward. But asking unanimous consent to invoke some of the House provisions as it relates exclusively to PPP in order to give this relief to small businesses like the restaurant industry now. Because for those who got their PPP loans early in the process, the 8 weeks is coming due, very soon. And the Senate will go out of recess for the Memorial Day recess. So by the time we get back, it might be too late. So we're going to go to the floor tomorrow and ask at least some of these provisions that would extend the clock ultimately for all PPP all PPP recipients, those who've received it in the past already, those who may receive it moving forward would get this extended time period. And I hope that consent will be granted. In the CARES Act, also, Congress provided expanded and extended unemployment insurance for full and part-time workers, those with limited work histories, the self-employed, independent contractors, and gig workers. Plus, the federal government is providing an additional $600 a week in addition to what one would normally get under unemployment. In New Jersey, you get about 60% of whatever your income was for 26 weeks. The CARES Act extended that for another 13 weeks. And until July 1st, it added $600 per week to whatever your baseline of unemployment is, in order to get families through this very difficult period of time. And if someone had already used up their 26 weeks, they're still eligible for the other 13 weeks. So we think that that's important. Now the state has received an unprecedented number of unemployment insurance benefits claims, and it continues to work through the backlog. I've raised this issue several times with both the governor as well as the commissioner of labor. And I've been assured that despite the processing challenges, that whatever money anybody was due, any one of your employees, for example, or any one of your coworkers, that they will still get the full amount. So we understand the challenge. We want to see New Jersey open for business again. We'd love to see a return to something like normal. It's never going to be, at least for a while, it's not going to be the way life was before the pandemic. It's a new normal. But one thing is certain, and I'll just close on this before there's a few slides we'd happy to share with you and then answer some questions. One thing I am convinced of is this: no matter how much money we spend, if we cannot mitigate the risk to the average New Jersey and the average American, that their trip to the bar, to the restaurant, to the mall, to the retail store, to the public square, has not been dramatically mitigated in terms of the risk of them, being contaminated with the virus. Unless we have that type of consumer confidence, we can all open up, but the question of what will happen will be totally really a challenging one which I believe we still won't have what we need. And we still won't get back to something of a new normal. That's why we're pushing so hard for something close to universal testing and contact tracing. Those are the ultimate keys to get the economy up and moving again in the way we'd like to see it. That means that what we did in the last round of pushing for $25 billion for testing and contact tracing, good foundation, still probably going to need some more to make all the states available to do that. We need to do that to, make sure that, in fact, there is consumer confidence that, okay, nothing is 100% guarantee, but I have dramatically mitigated the risk. Then and only then will we be able to get the economy up and running in a way that I think is necessary. And the final thing is, Jeannie mentioned you wish you were paying a sales tax and you haven't had any sales tax to pay. Well, the fact is that states like New Jersey, because the governor took these tough measures to starve the virus of any new people to infect, those social distancing measures cost an enormous economic consequence, and that's true for the state as well. And you cannot have our communities be able to enjoy the fullness if we're going to dramatically lay off police, firefighters, paramedics, hospital workers, and others, because the state and municipalities can't pay for it. So I have a bipartisan piece of legislation called the SMART Fund, $500 billion for across the country, a figure that Moody's, as well as the National Governors Association, has determined will be the shortfall across the country, so that, in fact, we can get the state to be in the proper place to deal with all of the issues that all of you as business people and that all of us as residents of the state are going to want to see. And we're committed to that goal. I'm proud to say that I have today we're on the Senate floor announcing several Republican co-sponsors. Senator Cassidy of Louisiana is my significant co-lead, the senator from Mississippi, and the senator from Maine, all Republicans, along with the senator from West Virginia, and of course, Senator Booker. And we believe we will add many others. And so that's also an important ingredient in everything that we're talking about.
Thank you. So I know we have some slides. Did you, Senator, want to go through those, or someone from your staff?
Yeah, I'll go through them. We'll do it briefly because I've talked about some of these things in my comments, but just for a visual, maybe we'll just go through them briefly if we can. Is that all right?
That's perfect.
Okay, so if you would put up the next slide, please. So as I think almost all of you know, the PPP program, 500 employees less, this is the place eligible to find, the SBA doesn't give loans directly, they give it to approved lenders. And that site that is on the screen, sba.gov/paycheck protection/find, is to find a lender. Those lenders have now been dramatically expanded, as I said in my remarks earlier, because too many of you couldn't get even the opportunity to apply for the program. Next slide, please. The SBA is requiring 75% of the payroll goes to retaining or rehiring employees who would otherwise be out of work. I'm urging Treasury, as I mentioned in my remarks, and the SBA to lift the non-payroll cap to at least 50%. I like the House version better, that has no limitation. But in the Senate, it is the art of the possible, meaning we have to get 60 votes in the Senate to do something. Neither side has 60 votes. So ultimately, it's the art of the compromise. But I would love to get to the House version. Maybe we can. But at least I know that Senator Cornyn of Texas is working with me to raise the amount of the non-payroll cap to 50% for a state like New Jersey. That's incredible. Incredibly important. The 8-week loan period, as I said, starts when the lender first gets a loan disbursement. That's a rigid time frame for PPP loan funds, and we're working to provide flexibility to small businesses to expand the time frame to both spend and still qualify for forgiveness as well. Next slide, please. The 2-year loan term for PPP is set presently by the SBA is too short a time frame to expect small businesses to repay the non-forgivable portion of the loans. So I'm working on legislation to extend the loan term. This is something, as I mentioned earlier, the House did, and certainly we would like to see that adopted. And also, you know, these 501c6 organizations that need relief as well. We are working on that to get that achieved as well. Next slide, please. What new funding is Congress working on? Next slide, please. Well, this is the legislation that passed the House of Representatives. It's pending before the Senate. I'm not suggesting that this legislation, as it passed the House, is going to make it through the Senate in its totality, even though there's a lot of good things in it. I think it'll be the art of a negotiation, but I do think it creates foundations, some of which I think is incredibly important for the restaurant and hospitality industry. And prohibiting Treasury from placing any limitations of non-payroll forgiveness, which means that if you used of your PPP loan, if you used 70% for the non-payroll elements that are qualified under the law, rent, you know, utilities, other commitments that are provided for in the law, that all of that would be forgiven. Right now, it's only 25%. So prohibiting Treasury from placing any limitation is a good thing for many of you. Extending the loan period from June 30th to December 31st, I think is a very good thing. That's something, you know, we're going to try to get tomorrow in our unanimous consent. If we don't get the full several months, then we're going to try to get a couple of months to buy time as the Congress, you know, the Senate negotiates over the House provisions. And of course, extend the PPP to all those nonprofits categorized as that 501c category. Next.
Thank you. The Restaurant Association appreciates that because we will fall in that category. So thank you.
Yep. Next slide, please. Also the HEROES Act, this is the legislation the House passed. It sets a loan maturity to a minimum, not a maximum, a minimum of 5 years. It sets aside 25% of the PPP loans to be made to small businesses with 10 or fewer employees. This is moving forward. And it extends the loan deferments from 6 months to 1 year. Next slide, please. Now, I know I got some questions I went through the association. I've also gotten directly from some of you. I'm going to really go through this really quick. I think you all know the nature of the unemployment insurance system. Next slide, please. You know, they have, the Department of Labor, and as many throughout the country, actually use a computer programming guide that was the very beginning of computer programming called COBOL. There's not even enough people around who remember what COBOL was around. So, you know, the bottom line is their system is running on outdated technology, and that's part of their challenge. So I asked so next slide, please. I asked the Federal Department of Labor to work with our state to help in processing the massive volumes and to upgrade their IT systems. And we are working on doing that. I know that the Commissioner of Labor has told me that they're moving through some massive numbers of people who are backlogged. This is the biggest issue I get in my office, and it's what we constantly are working on for individuals who have applied, qualified, and yet have not received their money. Next slide, please. This is part of what we said we're doing, so we can skip on that. Again, the unemployment insurance for those of you who may have employees, helping your colleagues and others or family members. One is eligible for up to 60% of what you were making in salary, with a maximum in New Jersey of $713. And in addition to that, so let's say that what you were making, 60% of what you were making adds up, for argument's sake, to $500. Well, between now and the 31st of July, you're going to end up facing and achieving an additional $600. You'd get the $500 you would normally get under unemployment. You'd get a $600 additional until the end of July. That is to help families get through a rather difficult period of time with a large number of people who are unemployed, and hold them over, and hopefully to the time that you're ready to open up and bring them back. Next slide, please. How to apply, of course, those are numbers. When, we'll give this presentation to the association. They can distribute to all those who might want it. But, the numbers, they're slammed when you call. I really think that the myunemployment.nj.gov is critical. That's the best way to apply for people who are looking to apply, who have not yet applied. I think that's the best way to get it. Also, again, if you're self-employed, an independent contractor, or a gig worker, you're now, these are not categories that normally were qualified for unemployment. For this period of time, we have qualified them for unemployment, and that site is helpful to determine whether actually you or any of your cohorts or family members might very well be qualified. Next slide, please. Now, Jeremy Julis is my constituent affairs director, and he has been plowing through, along with our staff, on all of, certainly on the unemployment question, and that is how you get a hold of Jeremy. It's Jeremy_Julis at Menendez.senate.gov. We're all working. I'm here in Washington speaking to you as we are voting here. But we are all working both in New Jersey and in Washington. We're working remotely still, but everybody's working, so everybody's accessible both by email and phone.
Okay.
And I think that's it.
Well, thank you. We do have just a couple questions if you have a few more minutes for us, and appreciate that. It's a lot to absorb, and I think there was so much confusion around PPP. And so I know one of the first questions from Craig Kunish is, what are the realistic expectation for changes to the PPP? What is fixable?
Yeah, I think a lot, as I've said in some of my remarks, I think a lot of the elements of what passed in the House HEROES Act is doable. I think, extending the time period in which you have to use the money, I think that's fixable. I think the payment length is doable. I think some element, now I'm not sure there's going to be the no limitation, but some element of increasing the non-payroll forgiveness is doable. Those are all elements I think that are doable, and I hope we can achieve them.
Thank you. Marilyn Schlossbach, who is our current chairwoman. So hi, Marilyn. What is the feeling of the Senate when this would be voted on? Are the Republicans on board? Fingers crossed. Just to let you know, the extension of the 600 is kind of prohibiting people from going back to work. Certainly know that it was needed. And I think in the HEROES Act, they talked about extending that $600. So I threw a few questions at you, but
yeah. Well, look, first of all, on the $600, I've made it very clear to people too that if your employer tells you, I'm willing to hire you back, then you run the risk of losing your unemployment compensation, because once you're told by your employer that in fact the job is ready and I'm ready to hire you under the same terms and conditions that existed before, of course, that you run the risk of losing your unemployment altogether. Not to mention that your employer may move onwards and go ahead and get somebody else because they need to open. So I think that is a mitigating factor to those who might want to say, well, why should I go back? I can stay home. And I think that also the Department of Labor is going to be putting out some notices to remind people that if your employer offers you employment under the same terms and conditions, you're obligated to take it. And if you reject it, then you lose the rights to your unemployment benefits. As it relates to when this will happen, I hope that the limited relief we're trying to get, just to get us through this period of time, this uncertainty that I mentioned, will happen tomorrow on the Senate floor. And we'll all let you know if it does, if we achieve it, getting unanimous consent to extend the time period under which, the whole 8 weeks issue is at play, and extending it. We want to extend it. What the HEROES Act does a lot longer, but even if we get another 8 weeks, that will give us the time. So when we come back from Memorial Day recess, which is a week, that will be not having people with the uncertainty of what to do. And then I would hope that at some point in the next 2 to 3 weeks, that we can get the Senate to negotiate with the House. I was talking to Moody Analytics, and these are the rating agencies and whatnot, and they independently, they're not Democrat or Republican, they work for businesses, was saying that there is at least $1 trillion worth in order to get us through the period of time, that we'll probably still see 10% unemployment by the end of the year in recovery. Now, 10%, which always would be normally, tragic and unacceptable. Of course, we're at 20-something% now. So they're talking about like at least $500 billion, like my state and local fund, and $500 billion probably, for businesses / individuals. So the bottom line is that's $1 trillion right there. So there is clearly need for greater stimulus. How that gets fashioned, in what way it gets fashioned, is the open question that I can't answer right now. But I think that at the end of the day, everybody's going to come to understand that's necessary.
Two more big issues that have faced our industry, and this question's brought up from Vito Cucci. He owns one of our wedding venues, and the concern is that the large wedding venue are certainly looking to be kind of, we're not sure where they're going to be, right? We've been talking with the governor's office, and it's quite scary. So business interruption is especially concerning to them, as it is with everybody else. And, we're seeing that the business interruption is being denied. Is what's being talked about. I hear there's maybe a fund. I mean, can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, there's some talk about. Well, first of all, there are some who would like to make federal law that says that all of that business interruption insurance has to cover the pandemic. And I think that would just buy us an enormous amount of litigation, and God knows before you'd ever see a dime of it, because it would be considered by many legal experts ex post facto. You're going after the fact. I made a contract with my insurance client. It had an exclusion. The exclusion, you can't now change the exclusion on me after the fact and change the whole dynamic. So the question is, that would probably get into huge litigation, and who knows when we'd ever see a dime from it. What there is some talk about is creating something like we did under terrorism risk insurance after September 11th, where we couldn't get risk insurance, for mostly for physical elements, and create something as a pandemic risk insurance, which is a backstop to the insurance industry to guarantee the potential for claims against a pandemic. Now, the problem with that is that to the extent that there's a lot of talk by the health experts here in Washington about a second wave that would prepare us for that, it wouldn't necessarily be all that helpful for that which has already happened. So that's what's up in discussions.
And then one of the other major topics, and then I think we have a couple more questions and we'll let you go.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go because I'm going to have a vote in a little bit. So
Okay, so the last one, and we'll forward these questions on to your team, but liability and these drive-by lawsuits, I guess there's currently about 700 lawsuits going on across the country with people saying that they have contracted COVID in the workplace, or they've gone maybe to a restaurant and now they have COVID. Is there going to be liability protection for our industry? Because that's obviously really scary, and we know some of these attorneys are just right to start that.
Yeah. Well, again, it depends what that liability protections look like, what the liability changes are. If I'm an Amazon worker and I was told to go work there and I didn't get any of the personal protective equipment that was necessary for me to work safely, and the choice was go to work that way or lose my job, I'm not sure that the Congress is going to say to that Amazon worker or that meatpacking plant worker, no, you have no right to do that. So of course it would depend upon how the employer acted, right, in cases like that. If someone is in the public square, i.e. a restaurant, and somebody goes and the restaurant has done everything it could have when it knew at the end of the day, then I could see the protections that, the limitations on liability that would be given. But the suggestion that we're just going to have a blanket, immunity from liability across the board for everyone, I don't think that will ever pass in the Congress, particularly on the side of workers, less so than on the side of issues with businesses. So I think it's going to be a question of, did one, within the norm of what we knew at the time, did one act accordingly? If one acted accordingly, they should have protection. If one did not act accordingly, then they probably should not have had protection.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and to everyone else, we'll definitely get those questions answered. Sir, thank you. Stay safe, and keep fighting for New Jersey and the rest of the country, especially our hospitality industry. We need you.
We will. I like to eat.
Thank you, Senator.
So,
Good luck tomorrow.
I like going to Jeannie's places. We will
We'll be waiting for you.
We'll fight hard. Take care. Thank you all.
Be well.